everyone, welcome to Wundertalks. This is episode 32 already, and today we're going to have two presentations. We're going to start with a case study by Greg and Christian from our Helsinki office. They're going to be showing a project they did. I'm probably going to butcher that name, but it's called loiste.fi, so a Finnish project. And we're going to follow with a presentation about layouts in Drupal 8 from Fredrik from our Berlin office. So let's just switch over to our Hangout here. Not a funky effect. And let's start with Greg and Andre. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm Christian.
I'm Greg.
We're both from the Helsinki office, and we worked on a project called loiste.fi, and we're going to just give you a small showcase of that. A little bit of background of the project. Loiste is an energy company in Finland. When you sell energy, it's a little bit trickier in the ways that you sell the energy and then you have the transport company which actually transports the energy from the power plant to your house, and Loiste does both. This is a complete overhaul of their website. They used to be on SharePoint, and basically they came to talk with Wunderkraut Finland after a presentation by Jonas at a sales event, if I'm not mistaken. This whole project that you're going to see took only 5 weeks to build. We started from scratch. There was nothing in there. We didn't want to import anything or, have any legacy content because, let's face it, SharePoint is not the best starting point for a new project. The site itself is rather simple. There's no magic in here apart from what Greg is going to demo. It's basically content types and just a couple of images, some lift-ups and lift-up mechanisms that we devised for them, and nothing really rocket science. The whole cost of this project was about the same as a SharePoint license for 1 year. And the reason why the project was initiated was that Loiste was sick and tired of having to wait weeks for any type of change to happen on their site. And now Greg is going to take you through the admin interface and all the niceties that he built.
Hello again, my name is Greg. So what I'm going to do is show you the back end of the site and a little bit of a mechanism how this thing works. Because of the time limitation that we had to deal with, 5 weeks, right? And basically the client, when they came to us, they had absolutely nothing. It was a complete blank slate and just lots of emotions of them being sick and tired of SharePoint and wanting to try something new and different, and they chose to go with Drupal, and they chose us to go with. So this is what we pulled off in 5 weeks. Log in to the back of it and see what she looks like. This particular site that we're looking at is actually running on my local, so some of the content is purely demo content, so never mind if some images don't quite make any sense. That's the reason why. So because of only 5 weeks being available to us, with this, the best way to accomplish this was basically let go of as much control as possible, right? And let the customer actually do most of your work as a web developer, right? So we give the customer all of the controls needed for them to build their own site, because there's simply not enough time for us to do it for them, right? How do we accomplish this? Well, we accomplish this by keeping it stupid simple, right? So this site has this many content types. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 content types. Basic page is the most used one by far. Other ones are kind of just specialized. it has how many views? It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 views. And that's it. And maybe 4 contexts. And that's done. So it's basically keep the site structure as simple as possible, and reuse and recycle as much as possible when it comes to content types, fields, listings, all of these things, right? So we've used extensively Display Suite and have used to accomplish that. So let's, for example, take a look at our front page. Basically everything that you can see here, starting from the top, ending with the bottom, can be edited from the Node Edit interface right here, including the images which kind of fade in and out at the top, the labels that are there. This is a conditional field, so if we don't want to make it a landing page, we want to make it just a regular basic page, we simply turn this off, and the editor is presented with a much cleaner interface, so they're not baffled by all these extra fields and having to fill them out. So in our case, in case where a client was not exactly very tech savvy, we've presented them with very simple sort of back-end interface, so they were never scared of it, and they were able to basically build their own site while we were still in the middle of actually developing it, which worked out quite well for us. Another cool thing that we've made here, just to make our lives easier, is image management. So we're using Media, the latest dev version of Media, in combination with multiple uploads. So that's multi-form and upload integration. So what that allows the customer to do is basically use this interface here to drag and drop their entire stock library into their Drupal site. Where did all my images go? Where are they now? Well, it doesn't matter. But basically, yeah, this is the multiple upload interface. So we just simply drag and drop all the files in here, hit next, and we get to a listing of all the files. Even better, after that, once the customer has all those files in there, like for example this image right here, which is currently featured on the home page, we've implemented the manual crop image style, so they never have to sort of come to us and bug us and say, you know, I would like my, you know, front page image to be a little different, because, well, they can do it all themselves. The manual crop module has matured so tremendously well. It's basically fully functional at this point. Well, you do have to use the latest dev versions for it to be nice and smooth, but it works, and it works like hell. So I highly recommend we use it on basically, there's no reason why we couldn't use it on every project, really. Another thing is the administrative interface itself. As you've probably noticed already, the theme may not be familiar to all of you, but this one is particular. It's called Add Minimal, and it comes with a submodule called Add Minimal Admin Menu. So what it does is basically reskins the admin menu to, one, to make it a little bit prettier, and two, most important thing that happens with the admin menu, with the Add Minimal theme, is it's actually responsive. So right here, right? So we can actually edit our site on our mobile phone if we feel so inclined. Of course, this never really truly happens with anybody, but it's a really cool thing to mention. For example, in a sales meeting, like, hey, you can log in from your phone and fix a typo on your site. How cool is that? And you show them that, and it works, and it's amazing, and it's wonderful, and the client's happy, and if the client's happy, you're happy. And I think that's basically about it. The rest of the site is fairly standard. Like, for example, this mega menu here is not a module of any kind. It's basically a normal standard Drupal menu, which has been extended with special menu items module. So some menu items are not links, allows us to do that. And a menu views item, which allows us to place this random content. This is basically a view block in the menu. And just two little simple things like that in the right combination allow us to have this kind of really cool looking effects which look much fancier than what they really are, which is basically a core Drupal site with a few handful of modules on top of it. And I think we're out of time. Christian, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just a short mention. The team for this project, the devs, Greg and myself, and we had Talviki and Hanno as the business guy who took initial contact with the customer and made it all happen, and then Talviki was our service designer.
Yeah, so everything from visual concept to the final launch was done in 5 weeks of development time and plus 2 weeks of discovery.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Wow, this is quite a quite a cool project and quite an impressive feat to do all of this. And I think it's great when we show that we can also do simple websites and do them well. So it doesn't always have to be complicated. So great job.
That's right. Yeah, and as a closing note, as Christian has mentioned, as far as client is concerned, the cost of this project to them, the entire development of this project cost them exactly the same amount as they paid for their old SharePoint license for a year.
Again, sales tip.
Yeah.
That's a very convincing argument. Before we move on to the second presentation, there's one thing that we've been doing recently about, during the Wundertalk, is to introduce people. And since I have both of you here, I wanted to ask, could you tell us in a couple of words who you are, what you do at Wunderkraut, and what you do outside of Wunderkraut?
I guess I'll start. So I've been at Wunderkraut for as long as Wunderkraut has existed, and for about half a year prior to that with Miara, Finland. I am originally from Canada. I grew up in Canada. I was born in Moscow, though. So I'm a Russian Canadian who now lives in Canada. That's my story. And in Wunderkraut, I'm at the moment basically a front end do it all, if you will, or do nothing, depends how you look at it. And outside of Wunderkraut, I am a father of a 3-year-old beautiful little girl, and basically that's it for me.
Okay, great.
I guess people know my face by now. I'm Christian. I was born in Romania, grew up there, came to Finland 10 years ago for my university off year. I wanted a gap year between high school and university and ended up getting stuck in Finland. At Wunderkraut, I do mostly back-end module development, and I'm also a CSP, Certified Scrum Professional. I'm Google Analytics individual qualifier, or whatever it is. Yeah, I hold a Google Analytics individual qualification certificate, and I do SEO and all sorts of nice things that just add value after the project is done.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for these introductions. It was great to have both of you on here, and now we're going to move on to the second topic, which is going to be presented by Fredrik from our Berlin office. Hi, Fredrik.
Hi, everybody. So the title of the talk was Layouts in Drupal 8, and one could assume that that would be a front-end topic, but I'm a back-ender, so basically what this talk is about, properly showing all the things with Drupal 8. Just a quick overview, why bother with this problem at all? I'm going to describe the problem space a little bit, going to go into detail with the current approaches and solutions that are being developed currently right now for Drupal 8. And we're going to look at some of the wins that I think we're going to have, and if we have time, there's also going to be a tiny demo of the UI that is currently in the works. So I'm not going to talk about all the great things that have made it into Drupal 8. There are a lot of them. But when we get to the point that we say, let's build a site in Drupal 8, whilst it's not as bad as it was with Drupal 7 when we were waiting for Views 7 to appear, block UI is still a super downer, and it's the only way of placing content. We just saw in the presentation, there was the panels module, there was context being used, there were display suites was mentioned. None of those things are properly in place yet. So we won't and we can't build sites with block UI. So beginning in March at a BOF at the Dev Days at Szeged, Andy from Wundertalks Germany and a couple of other Drupal developers from Amazing Labs or also from the Austrian community and Acquia started brainstorming about this. Recently there was a layout sprint in Zurich in Switzerland, and notably this whole movement has gained some momentum, not least because Tim Plunkett has joined Acquia and has done a lot of work in the plumbing and the stuff underneath. Also Eclipse GC, who did a lot on the plugin stuff and on the Scotch initiative, is also sort of back in things. So this thing has gained a lot of momentum. Briefly talking about what is the issue we're dealing with here, and I've mentioned sort of the three most prominent modules that are available there, which is panels, display suite, and context. And I think it's uncontroversial to say that using these modules is controversial, and a lot of shops use panels, display suite, and context in various ways. And core is certainly not the space to decide whether panels is the best solution or display suite or context. If we look at in more detail at what we have to deal with, we have, I think, 5 sort of big issues to deal with. This conditional access and visibility, to show a block here and there, not everywhere. We have to deal with contexts in the sense of I want to show the author's name, not just his author's UID, and bring in more related things. We have to deal with layouts, which means rendering things that could be blocks in regions and select between different layouts. Sometimes you want to have a 2-column layout. A different user should see a 3-column layout. We have a UI issue. Content needs to be placed by site builders. Sometimes content also needs to be placed by the clients. And we need to be dealing with routing, which means that if you have a landing page, you want to have some kind of way of perhaps reacting to a parameter in that route. I'm going to leave out other concerns because there are many, but this kind of brings us then, if we look at what other contrib modules bring to this matrix. I'm not going to talk about the matrix because one could spend a day on that in itself, but the conclusion is basically there's a lot of overlap, duplication, and conflict. And most of the time, core is actually more of a part of the problem rather than the solution. And that is one of the things that I think Drupal 8 is trying to solve. The things that I just mentioned are going to sort of structure the way I'm going to talk about the things that we are currently seeing in Drupal 8. So conditions, contexts, variants, and layouts, and I'm going to talk about that in the most detail, subrouting, and a little bit about the UI. So conditions. Why do we need conditions? Because we need to express conditions on when to display something, or showing what is going to be viewed. So the good thing is we have a conditions API in core, but until recently that was not used at all in core. But now, very recently, block visibility was ported to be conditions driven. That is, it's not hard coded anymore, and you can, through a simple mechanism, extend how and where blocks are shown. It's also done in a way that is reusable. So Page Manager, which is a Drupal 8 module, which basically corresponds to the Page Manager of CTools and D7, can reuse that. And more importantly, it's also built with the rules for the 8 people, which is going to mean that we're not going to have that actions, triggers, rules duplication, but that we stand a chance of using one conditions API and not having to code rules conditions, panels conditions, and actions. Moving on to contexts, and I'm talking context in the CTools kind of context, is we need to describe the types of data and also the instances of data that are available when we view something, most normally a page, and we need to add context and relationships to that. Again, Drupal 8 brings something to the yard. Type data API is in core, which is low level. It's basically like anybody that's dealt with rules. It's very similar to the way that rules describes data. Context API has been placed on top of that, and since I think 2 weeks, blocks have become context aware, which means they can declare requirements and consume context. What does that mean in principle? Basically, blocks are now CTools content types. I've pointed out, I don't know if you can see that on that little image. You can, for example, on a block, say, use this entity. So you can choose between the current user or, for example, an author, a user entity that's been brought into scope. I have to admit that I faked that screenshot, but it is possible. It's just not been exposed consistently. What we don't have is also a GUI to add those contexts or add relationships like we know them from panels. And so far, very few core blocks declare or use contexts, and that is something that there's going to be some more work on, and probably a lot more in Contrib. So this brings us to display variants and layouts, because it's great that we can have things that are aware of context and we can choose when to show something. But ultimately, we need to be able to place these things normally in regions, and we need to be able to define these regions, and we need to switch and select between these. A variant is a very, very new concept. I think it's been only committed last week, and Tim Plunkett is to be thanked for that. I just briefly copied the definition of a variant, which is slightly different from what you're used to in the panels world. It basically abstracts away a certain part. It dictates, I'm just going to read this because it kind of explains it, because it dictates the output of many parts of Drupal. The full page variant, which is being used by the block module, controls regions and outputs the block content placed in those regions. The important thing is that they are often chosen by some selection criteria, and they have to define their own way of rendering. It's going to get a little more clearer when I show you the actual two actual implementations. The simple one that I'm going to, or the most simple one that I'm going to start with, is an HTTP status code display variant, which is basically what you know from Page Manager, which is a redirect. And the second one is the full page variant, which is what has been mentioned just right now, which is used by Block UI. This is basically all you need to have in code in order to do a redirect. I'm not going to talk about the build configuration form method. It's basically anybody that's dealt with panels or views. It's basically a form API array that was returned. But the build method is what is interesting. You basically configure a status code and you return that. And at the right position, Page Manager calls this and then returns either a redirect, or if you, for example, wanted to give a 403, deny access to a certain route. Slightly more complicated is the full page variant, which is basically how Block UI is nowadays rendering content. Again, you have a build method. Interesting is also the get theme method, and you have a get region names. The get region names basically is just loading the regions that are defined in a theme, because Block UI still uses the old layouts that are defined in a theme, or the regions that are defined in a theme. Get theme loads the current theme, and this is all that happens in the build function. It basically loads with get region assignments all the blocks where they've been placed, and then renders them. This is basically just splitting out the old way that a page was rendered in Drupal. So just to summarize that, they're instantiated with some kind of context or data. In the previous case that were like in the full page display variant, it's basically the blocks and the theme. There is a build method that returns a render array, and because the actual implementation is abstracted away, we don't have a dependency on theme regions, and that opens the way for layout regions or even things like returning JSON. So, layouts. What do we need from layouts? Basically, layouts just define a list of regions, and they need to render themselves. They need to have an awareness of sort of how to return the output that has been placed in those regions. And we want that to be flexible and definable and shareable, because one of the problems is that Display Suite has one definition, the theme system has another definition of layouts, and panels, for example, brings another one. So layout plugins are meant to be super lightweight. This is basically all there is to the most simple layout. It's just, it has a method to retrieve region definitions, and it has a method that's called get region names that returns an array machine name to label. That is very similar to what we already saw in the full page variant, just that the full page variant doesn't use layouts because they are bound to themes, and as you can see, a system region list is still a function and not really pluggable. Declaring layouts should be simple. So we've, and this is very much work in progress, but we have basically want layouts to be definable programmatically. That's what you see on the right-hand side by means of a plugin definition and plugin annotations, or in most cases just via YAML, where you use a module name .layouts.yaml file that is auto-discovered and defines those layouts. I'm going to show you later, if I have time for that, a short demo where those things then come to play. So just to summarize that, we're working on having a simple registry of layouts that works, that makes very little assumptions. Again, we abstract the way of declaring and rendering. It's meant to be lightweight. And we hope to provide some clues for building admin UIs, but there is no, we're not going to have a layout builder that's going to generate front-end CSS. That's something that maybe happens in Contrib, but definitely not in Core. So the great thing is that this is now in Core, and there's also some work on mini panels, which is going to be really interesting. Berder and a couple of guys in Switzerland are working on that. Briefly, the two remaining things, which is going to be the GUI and routing. This is going to be a lot quicker. Block UI is going to be around, but as I showed you, it's just one possible UI, which uses the full page variant, theme regions, and blocks as the only things that you can do. But building new UIs on top of this is going to be easy and is something that people have started doing in D8 panels. Briefly, and this concludes the whole thing, we need the routing, and thankfully Tim Plunkett has worked on that. It's not entirely clear whether some of that is going to be moved into core, but Page Manager basically now does 80% of what the Page Manager module does 80% of what cTools Page Manager did in D7. So the big wins I think we have is that we have unified architecture in many places, and core becomes part of the solution and is not the problem anymore, at least hopefully. If we briefly look at the matrix again, is that there's going to be, at least in terms of selections and conditions and context, and in terms of variants, there's going to be something in core, and D8 panels will be able to use that. Display Suite won't need some of those things, and we hope that in terms of layouts, we will be able to come to an agreement there. Subrouting might end up in core, might live in Page Manager. Either way, it's not an impediment to core. All right, so I'm just going to quickly switch to a local installation of D8. This is now the Page Manager, where we can add a new page, which is very similar to what you're used. If this 100% finished, we could add we're familiar from panels, but I'm not doing that right now because it's a little buggy. Here we see something that is quite similar to the way panels works again. We have a display variant. This is the one that I showed you. You have various status codes that you can send. By default, the path Wunder would return a 404. We can add new display variants, and I'm going to show the most simple one, which is something that Tim has worked on, which is which looks very much basically like Block UI. You can add new blocks, but it's basically like a Block UI that you can choose and configure for every path. So not like in the old days where you had to go into configuring a block and say, show me powered by Drupal only on this path. You define the path and then you place the blocks in there. A much more sane way of going about it. We see selection conditions down here. So things that are very familiar to us from the panels world. I'm just going to briefly show you sort of the experimental GUI that we're working on for a more panelsy interface. Here we have a layout selector. These layouts have been declared. I'm just going to select the Kevin O'Leary layout because it's the most complicated one that we have. And you see a UI that is mildly visual. We have different regions where we can add blocks. We can also focus on regions, which gives us more of a overview. We can add blocks. You see we have an entity view user. We could bring our user into scope, add blocks, add additional visibility rules. And I'm not sure whether this is going to look like anything, but we see the breadcrumbs being rendered out here. If I add the main navigation, for example, it's going to look like nothing. But as I said, I'm a backhander. Okay, this is this basically brings me to the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I wasn't aware of all these things. This motivates me to do some work in D8 again. Very nice. Yeah. So as you mentioned, questions. Please reach out to Fredrik. And well, we actually have a little bit of time, a couple of more minutes. So do you want to go ahead and present yourself as well, and just let us know who you are, what you do at Wunderkraut and outside of Wunderkraut?
Yeah, all right. My name is Fredrik, and I've been haranguing you for the last 20 minutes. I do backend stuff at Wunderkraut. I've joined Wunderkraut last October. I've been doing Drupal since 2007, 2008. I'm 38 years old. Going to be a dad in less than a month. Otherwise, I'm pretty much like most Berliners. I like to drink and listen to loud music and closed and open spaces.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank again also our previous speakers, Greg and Christian. Yeah, it's been a very exciting Wundertalk. Next week we're going to have another presentation from colleagues from the German offices, one in Berlin, one in Munich, talking about a solution they'll build for a project called Elgato, and it was a solution built on Drupal 7 to build complex layouts in a very intuitive way. Some very nice tools. Oh, and I shouldn't mention them by name. So it's going to be Benedict, Bene, and Marcus, who you also know from the Wundertalks, who's moderating also when I'm not here. So yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any suggestions for topics, as usual, please reach out to me, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.